After 300 hours of basically non-stop Monster Hunter Rise action, what are my thoughts on the game? There are two answers here, a short answer, and a long answer. If you just want the short answer, I'll say it right now. Yes, Monster Hunter Rise is indeed a good game, while not perfect and by no means the best the series has to offer in my opinion, it is still well worth the $60 price tag. And if you never played the games before, this is a very good choice to start with, as it is the easiest to get into, regardless of what people say of its difficulty. And on with the long answer, please keep in mind, I am not a reviewer, this is not an objective review of the game. This is simply the opinion of someone who grew up with the series and loves the games to death. Now, do I think Rise is a good game? Yes, but I think the game has some misses in its formula, but to be fair I think the problems are not exclusive to Rise, but the 5th generation as a whole. For those who don't know what I mean when I say 5th generation, let me explain quickly. Very much like Pokemon, Monster Hunter divides its eras in generations. What divides the games are the visual graphics, and the overall gameplay mechanics. First generation comprises of Monster Hunter G, and Monster Hunter Freedom. Second generation is Monster Hunter DOS, Monster Hunter Freedom 2, and Monster Hunter Freedom Unite. Third generation is Monster Hunter Tri, Monster Hunter Portable 3rd, and Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate. Fourth generation is Monster Hunter 4, Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, Monster Hunter Generations, and Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate. And the last one, 5th generation, has Monster Hunter World, Iceborne, and Monster Hunter Rise. While every generation changed the game in some aspects, 5th generation changed the series' DNA almost completely, but for the sake of not wasting too much of people's time, I'll leave that discussion as another possible future video. Let's start with the things I don't particularly like about Rise. The forced wyvern riding mechanic. Wyvern riding is a cool idea on paper, I just wished the execution was a bit different. You either have to ride the monster and wall bang it to continue, or wait it out completely. I would have preferred if it was an optional thing you could do, rather than something you eventually have to do. Overall a neat mechanic, but needs tweaking. Next point, the switch skills. Switch skills are basically the hunter arts from Generations and Generations Ultimate, but much easier to use and spam. The issue isn't with the switch skills themselves, but more so on how some skills are way more powerful or useful than others. There is a bit of an unbalance between the skills, but they could be tweaked and fixed. Next point is overall movement. This is a more personal view, but the movement in the game is a bit inconsistent. For how insanely fast getting around in Rise is with the wire bugs and polymeutes, when in an actual fight your movement seems comparable to that of a cinder block. Dodging and rolling seems to get you nowhere, and when you put even 1 point in evade extender, you suddenly teleport from one place to another, an avoidable point, but still ever present. The next point is the game's overall difficulty, and not on how the monsters' fights are difficult, because that will always be a subjective thing and vary from person to person. What I'm talking about is on how generous and forgiving the game is, versus how stingy and punishing the game is. 5th generation as a whole is very forgiving and generous, you really don't have to worry too much on resources. And in Rise, grinding for monster parts is easier than ever because armors and weapons require way less items, making it a whole much easier process. Is this a bad thing? Not necessarily, but this could spoil people in a bad way because if the Monster Hunter team decides to increase the amount of items required to craft stuff, people are going to complain. And the final point I want to point out for this segment is Zenny or the money management. Rise has a huge problem with the amount of money you get versus the amount you need to craft some of the higher end stuff. One thing I'm not a fan of, is how 5th generation divides the reward money from quests between the amount of people in said quest. Makes sense in game lore wise, but it's pretty stupid in my opinion. Now let's talk about the things I do like about Rise. For one is the separation of village quests and hub quests. Village quests may be totally easier, but it gives new players reason to learn and adapt on their own. Hub quests are also on a pretty decent difficulty in terms of monster fights, all pretty doable and nothing too hard. Next point is wire bug management and usage. I think using the wire bug for a lot of moves, wire dash, and wire fall, is a nice balance of offensive and defensive options. It's also just cool to zip around the maps with the wire bug. Next point is map design. I was not a huge fan of World's map design because all the maps were incredibly huge and sometimes hard to navigate. The Ancient Forest is a prime example of this, a pretty location, but horrible to navigate. Rise makes smaller maps by comparison, and they're much easier to navigate, and with the wire bug and polymeutes, much faster as well. My next point is the map exploration. One of the reasons I didn't like World's maps was because there were a lot of areas with no real reason to explore, some more than once. Rise added the hunter helpers and the Spira birds, small additions, but they give good reason to explore the map a bit. And my final point here is the pause button. I can't stress enough how much a pause button is needed in Monster Hunter, and I really hope they don't take it out in future games. Now let me talk about a few things I'm ambivalent to. First point here is sub-camps. I can't say I hate the idea of sub-camps, and being able to fast travel between points, but if they take it out in future games, I wouldn't be upset about it. Next point is charm farming. Charm farming has been around since 3rd generation, and although it is still a huge grind to get good charms, it's still a much better experience than farming decorations. And for my final thing in this list is to talk about things I wish stayed or came back. First one is the farm. I'm not talking about the item multiply thing, I mean an actual farm that you took care of in between hunts and made better, like in Freedom Unite and Portable 3rd. It's a real shame they took it out when there was no real reason to. The simplification isn't bad, but taking away the uniqueness and charm little by little kinda bothers me a little. My final point here is the investigation quests from World. It was a great idea from World and Iceborne that I actually fully expected to appear in Rise. But to my surprise it wasn't in the game, and I'm not sure why. It would have been cool to see different quests where the monsters appear in different areas with also different monsters. For my conclusion and overall final thoughts on Rise, to TLDR, Rise is a good game but with flaws, which is fine. No game is perfect. I see a lot of people online say that Rise has no content, which is not true. It has a lot of content, it's just really easy to get access to said content. It's also a shame that Rise has released in a difficult time, and many of the base game content was added later. It was free, sure, but still not ideal. Would I recommend this game? Yes, without a doubt really, a great game with a lot of content that's pretty easy to get. It's hard not to recommend it. I hope your takeaway from this wasn't that I hate 5th generation or that Rise is bad. It's not, it's flawed, but not bad. But I'll leave it here. Remember that this is not an objective take, but a subjective view. And with that, see you next time, and happy hunting.